Mm. I'm live. Hello, my name is Patti Napolitano, and I am a social worker. And like so many other social workers, I engage in advanced practice, advanced generalist practice, as well as clinical tasks in the state of Ohio. Today, we are in our course accompaniment. This is one of the two articles that accompany our third week of coursework. And I like reading these out loud because on, how humans learn, how human brains learn, we process information differently grammatically when we visually read it versus when we listen to it. And I just find it very helpful to be talking through the content before I then give a summary. So this week we are reading from the Rutgers University Press out of New Brunswick, New Jersey, and London, Chapter 3, Improving Health Through Community Organization and Community Building, a Health Education Perspective. And this is edited by Meredith Winkler, but written by Meredith Winkler and Nina Wallterstein. Although a number of new approaches and change strategies have been developed and adapted by health education professionals in recent years, the principles and methods loosely referred to as community organization remain a central method of practice. For the purposes of this book, community organization is the process by which community groups are helped to identify common problems or goals, mobilize resources, and in other ways develop and implement strategies for reaching the goals they collectively have set. The newer and related concept of community building, as Cheryl Walter suggests in Chapter 5, is not a method so much as an orientation to the ways in which people who identify as members of a shared community engage together in the process of community change. Implicit in both of these definitions is the concept of empowerment, an enabling process through which individuals or communities take control over their lives and their environment, Rappaport, 1984. Indeed, Murray Ross, 1955, widely regarded as the father of community organizing practice, argued early on that community organization could not be said to have taken place unless community problem-solving ability had been increased in the process. Strict definitions of community organizations also suggest that the needs or problems around which community groups are organized must of necessity be identified by the community itself, not by an outside organization or change agent. Thus, even though a health education professional may borrow some principles and methods from community organizations to help mount an AIDS organizing effort in the community, he or she cannot be said to be doing community organization in the pure sense unless the community itself has identified AIDS as the problem area it wishes to address. Community organization is important in health education in part because it reflects one of the field's most fundamental principles, that of starting where the people are. But community building and organizing are also important in light of the evidence that social involvement and participation can themselves be significant psychosocial factors in improving perceived control, individual coping capacity, health behaviors, and health status. Cohen and Sine, 1985, Eng and Cunningham, 1990. Finally, as suggested in Chapter 1, the rediscovery of community and the heavy accent being placed on community partnership and community-based health initiatives by government agencies, foundations, and the like suggests the need for a further refinement of theory, methods, and measurement techniques in this area. In this chapter, key concepts and principles of community organization and community building are examined for their relevance for health education professionals and others working at the interface of health systems and communities. After a brief historical look at the field and process of community organization and the emergence of community building practice, the concept of community is examined, and several models of community organization and community building are presented. Key theoretical and conceptual bases of community organization and community building are then explored and a basis laid for their further development and use in subsequent chapters. I just went to a presentation on this entire thing with the care organization in the Cumberland Fire Department, which is just absolutely phenomenal timing. It makes me think of more interviews I want Community organization and community building in historical perspective. The term community organization was coined by American social workers in the late 1800s to describe their efforts to coordinate services for newly arrived immigrants and the poor. As Charles Garvin and Fred Cox, 1995, have pointed out, however, although community organization is typically portrayed as having been born of the settlement house movement, several important milestones that took place outside of social work should by rights be included in any history of community organization practice. Prominent among these are 1, the organizing by African Americans during the post-Reconstruction period to try salvaging newly won rights that were rapidly slipping away. 2, the populist movement, which began as an agrarian revolution and became a multi-sectoral coalition and a major political force. And 3, the labor movement of the 1930s and 1940s, which taught the value of coalition formation around issues, the importance of full-time professional organizers, and the use of conflict as a means of bringing about change. Within the field of social work, early approaches to community organization stress collaboration and the use of consensus and cooperation as communities were helped to self-identify and to increase their problem-solving ability. Garvin and Cox, 1995, Ross, 1955. By the 1950s, however, a new brand of community organization was gaining popularity that also stressed confrontation and conflict strategies for social change. Most closely identified was Saul Alinsky, 1969-1972. Social action organizing stressed redressing power imbalances by having outside organizers help to create dissatisfaction with the status quo among the disenfranchised, build community-wide identification, and assist members in devising winnable goals and nonviolent conflict strategies and other means to bring about change. From the late 1950s onwards, as Robert Fisher describes in Chapter 4, strategies and tactics of community organization were increasingly being applied to the achievement of broader social change objectives through the civil rights movement, followed by the women's movement, the gay rights movement, anti-Vietnam War organizing, the disability rights movement, and increased organizing among people of color worldwide. The 1980s and 1990s witnessed the adaptation and development of new community organization tactics and strategies in areas as diverse as the AIDS crisis and the new rights efforts to have abortion banned in the United States. In addition, the effective use of personal computer technology has greatly increased, with groups across the political spectrum going online to build community and to identify and organize supporters on a mass scale. See Chapter 20. So if you want to look at the new rights efforts, we also have a textbook I'll reference later in the course that the New Right uses as their handbook for banning abortion in the United States. In the health field, a major new emphasis on community participation beginning in the 1970s culminated in the World Health Organization's adoption in 1986 of a new approach to health promotion that stressed increasing people's control over the determinants of their health. High-level public participation and intersectoral cooperation, the World Health Organization, 1986. As noted in Chapter 1, the WHO initiated Healthy Cities movement, emerged as a prominent reflection of this new approach and quickly grew to involve more than 4,500 healthy cities and communities worldwide. Dole, 1986. Its aims were to create sustainable environments and processes through which governmental and non-governmental sectors could work in partnership to create healthy public policies, achieve high-level participation in community-driven projects, and ultimately reduce inequities and disparities between groups. Dole, 1993, and Soros, 1995. Finally, alongside these developments has been a growing appreciation of the importance of organizers facilitating community building, a process that people in a community engage in themselves rather than being concerned solely with community organizing, a process in which the outside organizer typically plays a key role. See Chapter 5. So less consulting, more building of community citizenship. The community building orientation is reflected in efforts such as the Black Women's Health Project, a network of close to 100 groups in the United States and in several third world countries that stresses empowerment through self-help and consciousness raising for social change. Avery, 1990. As Walter suggests in Chapter 5, community building projects like this one are strength-based and grounded in feminist notions of power and power with rather than the more masculine concept of power over. So it's power with rather than power over that is frequently encountered in traditional organizing. French, 1986. These efforts further borrow from feminist organizing and accent on the process of practice, Hyde, 1990, and on organizing as holistic, involving both rational and non-rational elements of a human experience. Gutierrez and Lewis, 1995. Although theoretical work and practical applications and research in the area of community building remain in their infancy, community building practice may become an increasingly important complement to more traditional notions of community organization in the years ahead. The concept of community. Integral to a discussion of community organization and community building practice is an examination of the underlying concept of community. Although typically thought of in geographic terms, communities may also be non-locality identified and based instead on shared interests or characteristics such as ethnicity, sexual orientation, or occupation. Fell in 1995. Communities indeed have been defined as 1. Functional spatial units meeting basic needs for sustenance, 2. Units of patterned social interaction, and or 3. Symbolic units of collective identity. Hunter, 1975. Eugenia Eng and Edith Parker, 1994, add a fourth political definition to community as a social unit, that is, people coming together to act politically to make changes. Two sets of theories are relevant for understanding the concept of community. The first of these, the ecological systems perspective, is particularly useful in the study of autonomous geographic communities, focusing as it does on population characteristics such as size, density, and heterogeneity. The physical environment, the social organization or structure of the community, and the technological forces affecting it. In contrast, the social systems perspective focuses primarily on the formal organizations that operate within a given community, exploring the interactions of community subsystems, economic, political, etc., both horizontally within the community and vertically as they relate to each other, to other extra community systems. Fell in 1995. Roland Warren's 1963 classic approach to community clearly fits within the latter perspective, envisioning communities as entities that change their structure and function to accommodate various social, political, and economic developments. Similarly, Alinsky's view of communities as reflecting the social problems and processes of an urban society, Retz's 1980-40, provides a good example of social systems perspective. Clearly, the perspective on community that one adopts will influence one's view of the appropriate domains and functions of community organization process. Community development specialists, example, agricultural extension workers and Peace Corps volunteers, thus have tended to focus over the years on helping people identify with and bring about changes within their own geographic community, implicitly defining the latter as a unit unto itself. Kinduka, 1975. By contrast, proponents of a broader approach typified by Alinsky 1972 and other social action organizers have encouraged organization around issues such as public housing and unemployment and recognitions of the tremendous impact of those larger socioeconomic issues have on local communities. Similarly, though communities are rich in diversity with multiple interacting subcommunities, whether one views the community as more or less heterogeneous will determine the strategies one employs and often the types of organizing goals one pursues. Finally, as Felix Rivera and John Ehrlich, 1995, have suggested, an appreciation of the unique characteristics of communities of color should be a major consideration in any thinking about organizing within such communities. These investigators argue that many communities of color may be characterized as Neo-Gemeinschaft, exhibiting some of the characteristics of Gemeinschaft social systems in having strong social support systems and relationships that are personal, informal, and sentiment-based rather than formal, specialized, and utilitarian. See Chapter 13. The neo aspect of Rivera and Elrich's 1995 and 97 designation, however, refers to the fact that these communities' life experience takes place within a causal, deterministic reality based on racism and exploitation, end quote. In African American communities, for example, market exploitation, argues Cornell West, 1993, has led to a shattering of the religious and civic organizations that have historically buffered these communities against hopelessness and nihilism. He calls for community change through a recreation of a sense of agency and political resistance based on, quote, subversive memory, the best of one's past, without romantic nostalgia, end quote. A view of community that incorporates such a perspective would support building on pre-existing social networks rather than creating new structures, and would emphasize self-determination and empowerment. Rivera and Ehrlich, 1995. An example of this is cigarette and coffee sales in meal sites. It's an entire market. So rather than reinventing the wheel and saying you can't do that or you must do this, those are relationships that we really want to understand how we can use them to spread healthy sales and healthy entrepreneurship and healthy needs being met within the community based on informal relationships. Models of community organization. Although community organization is frequently treated as though it were a singular model of practice, several typologies of community organization have been developed on the premise that this phenomenon comprises various alternative change models. The best known of these typologies is Jack Rothman's Rothman and Trotman, 1987, categorization of community organization as consisting of three distinct models of practice: locality development, social planning, and social action. Briefly, locality development is heavily process-oriented, stressing consensus and cooperation, and aimed at building group identity and a sense of community. By contrast, social planning is heavily task-oriented, stressing rational, empirical problem solving, usually by an outside expert. Social action is both task and process oriented. It is concerned with increasing the problem-solving ability of the community and with achieving concrete changes to redress imbalances of power and privilege between an oppressed or disadvantaged group and the larger society. Originally arguing that most community organizing efforts tended to fall in one or the other of these categories, Rothman has more recently suggested that many professionals use a mixing and phasing of two or more of the models, Rothman and Trotman, 1987, rather than relying solely or principally on any one. The Heart Health Community Trials and patch interventions have mixed social planning with elements of locality development. Farquhar et al., 1994, Patch, 1992, Brockton Kingsbury, 1990. Whereas organizers in the Alinsky tradition have mixed social action and locality development in their community actions. Marquez, 1990, Weschler, 1990, Guillory, Willie, and Duran, 1988. Rothman's typology has remained for more than 20 years the dominant framework within which community organization has been examined and understood, and as such, it has had a significant impact on practice. Despite continued widespread application, however, the typology and its underlying assumptions have a number of important limitations. First, the use of the term locality development may be unnecessarily restrictive, discouraging a consideration of organizing along non-geographic lines. Second, inclusion of a model, social planning, that often relies heavily on outside technical experts and does not necessarily increase the problem-solving ability of the community appears to contradict one of its most basic criteria of effective organizing. Third, as Walter suggests in Chapter 5, the fact that this typology is a problem-based and organizer-centered rather than strength-based and community-centered constitutes a philosophical and practical limitation that may be particularly problematic as organizing increasingly occurs in multicultural contexts. Partly in reaction to the perceived limitations of the Rothman typology, Walter, Chapter 5, and others, Gardner, 1991, Himmelman, 1992, Labonte, 1994, Wallerstein and Sanchez Merki, 1994, Kay and Wolf, 1995, have suggested newer models of collaborative empowerment and community building practice that provide important alternative approaches. These models are, in part, descendants of the community development model in their emphasis on self-help and collaboration. Yet, as they extend beyond the tradition within community development that is externally driven and may implicitly accept the status quo, they take their parentage from community-driven development, where community concerns direct the organizing in a process that creates healthy and more equal power relations. Labonte, 1994, Purdy et al., 1994. The newer community building model emphasizes community strengths not as nostalgia for the good old days, but as a diversity of groups and systems that can identify shared values and nurture the development of shared goals. Gardner, 1991. Arthur Hinneman's 1992 collaborative empowerment model, for example, includes many of the steps or activities stressed in more traditional organizing. For example, clarifying a community's purpose and vision, examining what others have done, building a community's power base, but puts its heaviest accent on enabling communities to play the lead role so that the real empowerment, rather than merely community betterment, is achieved. John McKnight's 1987 notion of community regeneration has at its heart enabling people to recognize and contribute their gifts, the totality of which represents the building blocks or assets of a community that enable it to care for its members. See Chapter 10. Along similar lines, Walter's community building practice approach is described in Chapter 5 not as a method, but as a way of orienting oneself in community that places community at the center of practice. Walter's concept of community building attempts to balance and blend such elements of community as historicity, identity, and autonomy within the dimensions of community development. Community planning, community action, community consciousness, and the commons, where the latter encompasses the relationship between the community and its broader environment. As such, the community building approach contrasts significantly with more traditional notions of community organization practice that are community-based, but not necessarily of and by community. Wolf, 1993, see also Chapters 5 and 6. Lying midway between older models of community organizing and newer conceptualizations of community building are models that incorporate some elements of each, while putting the greatest accent on the culturally relevant practice. As Rivera and Ehrlich, 1995, have pointed out, the preferred models and ideologies of organizers from the dominant white culture frequently are ill-suited to addressing issues of race and culture that often represent the most urgent concerns within our communities of color. As a counter to what Rivera and Ehrlich described as organizers' myopia from Horwit 1989, newer models for community organizing in a multicultural society are needed. Prominent among these models is the feminist approach to community organizing with women of color, developed by Lorraine Gutierrez and Edith Lewis, 1995, and described in detail in Chapter 13. The model borrows a number of salient principles from feminist organizing, among them the use of a gender lens to analyze the causes and solutions of community problems, a heavy accent on process and empowerment, and application of the feminist principle, the personal is political, to organizing with and by women. But Gutierrez and Lewis's model is critical of feminist organizing for its failure to adequately address racism, to focus on issues of salience in community of color, and to acknowledge the other lenses or voices, such as race and ethnicity, through which much of the experience of women must also be understood. 1994-23. Gutierrez and Lewis's model is based on practice principles that would have the outside organizer, quote, learn about, understand, and participate in the women's ethnic community. Recognize and build upon the ways in which women of color have worked effectively in their own communities, and recognize and embrace the conflict that characterizes cross-cultural work, end quote, 34. Another community organizing model that puts its heaviest accent on culturally relevant practice is Ronald Braithwaite and colleagues 1989, Braithwaite, Bianchi, and Taylor 1994. Community organization and development model for health promotion in communities of color. Although written from the perspective of the outside organizer and admonishing him or her to engage in such initial steps as getting to know the community and its ecology through participatory ethnography and gaining entree and credibility, the central thrust of the COD model, Community, Organization, and Development, COD, the COD model involves facilitating the development and effective functioning of a community-dominating and controlled coalition board. The latter, in turn, undertakes its own community assessment, sets policy, facilitates leadership development, and on the basis of bottom-up planning and community problem-solving, designs culturally relevant interventions. The COD model, in short, appears to move from initial reliance on more community organizing to an incorporation of many of the principles of community building practice, while stressing throughout the cultural context within which both organizing and community building take place. Finally, alternatively defined as a model of community organization practice and as a strategy or method used across models is coalition building. Increasingly popular in the health field in areas as diverse as chronic disease, drugs and alcohol, violence, and the fight against budget cuts. Goodman, Burdine et al., 1993, Kay and Wolf, 1995. Coalitions have attracted heavy public and private sector funding, but have only begun to be studied in a systematic fashion. See Goodman, Burdine et al., 1993, and Goodman, Wandersman et al., 1996, for important recent exceptions. Coalitions have spanned the continuum, from locality development to social action models, and from community organizing to community building, and both have been both needs-based and strengths-based. In theory, if not always in reality, they are well suited to the new emphasis on collaboration and partnership in community practice. At the same time, the inevitability of hidden agendas and the need to understand conflict and negotiate differences, Gardner 1991, Kay and Wolf 1995, may make effective coalition building a difficult undertaking. See chapters 16 and 17. Thus, several models of community organizing and community building have surfaced within the last decade to complement a long history of earlier organizing approaches. Figure 3.1 attempts to integrate new perspectives with the older models, presenting a typology that incorporates both needs and strengths-based approaches. Along the needs-based continuum, community development, primarily consensus model, is contrasted with Alinsky's social action, primarily a conflict-based model. This is the common ground versus the disruptor, consensus versus conflict. And there is a chart on this page 38 of this chapter. The newer strengths-based model contrasts a community-building capacity approach with an empowerment-oriented social action approach. Several concepts span these two strengths-based approaches, such as community competence, leadership development, and the multiple perspectives on gaining power. Empowerment, though a separate quadrant in the figure, is also a concept that can ideally be realized within the three other models of organizing. Collaboration straddles the needs and strengths-based quadrants primarily a consensus strategy, with advocacy primarily a conflict strategy. In the middle circle of the figure are several strategies of organizing, such as grassroots organizing and coalition building. None of these falls into one quadrant. Rather, each may incorporate multiple tendencies or models depending on the starting place and the dynamics of an ever-changing social context. Key concepts in community organization and community building practice. Although no single unified model of community organization or community building exists, several key concepts are central to affecting and measuring change on the community level. Power, empowerment, and critical consciousness. As noted in Chapter 1, power is central to community organizing, particularly in the social action tradition of Saul Alinsky, 1969-1972. Indeed, Alinsky argued that organizing and power are almost always synonymous, but he defined power, 1969, as the ability to bring about decisions that shape and determine outcomes. Stephen Luke's 1974 conceptualization of power as occurring on several levels is helpful for understanding power and its relationship to community organizing. At the level of the individual, power refers to the ability to make decisions within the existing rules of the game, such as by voting on a healthcare reform or anti-smoking initiative. At the level of the organization, power involves the ability to define the rules of the game, as when elites and powerful organizations determine which issues become hot topics of debate. As Meredith Minkler, Stephen Wallace, and Marion McDonnell, 1994 to 1995, 115, point out, the ability of the new right to repeatedly make abortion an election issue and the ability of the tobacco industry to pour millions of dollars into fighting, albeit sometimes unsuccessfully, laws that would prohibit smoking in public places are illustrative of organizational power. At the level of the system, power involves the ways in which the structure of the economic and political systems favor certain interests without any conscious decision-making, agenda setting, or manipulation of public policy. The fact that actions would improve the environment or promote the public's health tend not to be taken if they would restrict corporate profits is an example of such systemic or structural power. Minkler et al., 1994-1995. See also Chapter 7. Antonio Gramsci's notion of hegemony, Simon, 1991, which involves people actively accepting values that are against their best interest, is one reason that structural power is reproduced. As noted in Chapter 1, Feminist Perspectives on Organizing, Hyde, 1990, Bradshaw, Soifer, and Gutierrez, 1994, Whale, 1986, and newer conceptualizations of community building, McKnight, 1987, Himmelman, 1992, see also Chapter 5, have added depth and breadth to our understanding of power as it relates to community practice. Feminist perspectives, for example, view power not as a finite resource that must be gained from the other, Bradshaw et al., 1994-31, but as an essentially limitless resource rooted in energy, strength, and effective communication, Bricker Jensen and Hueyman, 1986-12. Ronald Labonte addresses power as a social relationship with contradictory elements in Bernstein et al., 1994. And Labonte, 1990. Borrowing from Marilyn French, 1986, Labonte suggests that power from within and power with, the collective aspect of power from within, are moral, spiritual sources of power that can be constantly expanded as people empower themselves. It may be necessary, however, to use power to influence and challenge oppressive power over relationships which have a material base of denomination through force or ideological hegemony, in order to create change on personal, interpersonal, and political levels. Gutierrez and Lewis, 1995, Hawks, 1991, Labonte, 1990. Just as there are a number of perspectives on power, numerous perspectives now exist on the notion of empowerment. Although the term itself has been justifiably criticized as a catch-all phrase in social science, Rappaport, 1984, empowerment nevertheless represents a central tenet of community organization and community building practice. Within public health, empowerment or community empowerment have been variously defined, from communities achieving equity, Katz, 1984, or having the capacity to identify problems and solutions, Braithwaite et al., 1989, Cottrell, 1996, to communities possessing participatory self-competence in their political life, Florin and Wandersman, 1990, Kiefer, 1983, 1984. Though many limit their definition to a narrow individual focus, similar to self-esteem or self-confidence, community organizing needs a broader definition. Empowerment is a social action process by which individuals, communities, and organizations gain mastery over their lives in the context of changing their social and political environment to improve equity and quality of life. Rappaport, 1984, Wallterstein, 1992. For health educators and other social change professionals, these contradictory elements raise issues of our own practice. Many of us have higher status positions than community members. Can people in positions of dominance or privilege derived from culture, gender, race, or class empower others? Or must people empower themselves? If empowerment includes the dimension of transferring power to others, professionals may need to let go of their own power to make it more available to others. In Labonte's words, empowerment is a fascinating dynamic of power given and taken all at once, a dialectical dance between consensus and conflict, professional expertise and lay wisdom, hierarchic institutions, and community circles, in Bernstein et al., 1994, 285. The processes and outcomes of empowerment need to accommodate a view of change process that includes the interaction of individuals, the interactions of individuals and communities, and changes in the social structure itself. For individuals, empowerment challenges the perceived real or powerlessness that comes from the health injuries of poverty, chronic stressors, lack of control, and few resources, or what Lensheim, 1988, has termed lack of control over destiny. Individuals may experience enhanced psychological empowerment, which includes increased political efficacy and motivation to act, Zimmerman, 1990, and enhanced social support. As individuals engage in community organizing efforts and community building, community empowerment outcomes can include increased sense of community, greater participatory processes and competency and community competence, and outcomes of actual changes in policies, transformed conditions, or increased resources that may reduce inequities. As communities become empowered and better able to engage in collective problem solving, key health and social indicators may reflect this, with rates of alcoholism, divorce, suicide, and other social problems beginning to decline. Moreover, the empowered community that works effectively for change can bring about changes in some of the very problems that contributed to its ill health in the first place. Israel, 1985, Minkler, 1992. The link between individual and community level empowerment is strengthened through the development of critical consciousness or conscientization. Conscientization, a concept that comes from Brazilian educator Paulo Freire, 1970-1973. Freire developed a methodology for teaching illiterate peasants to read by teaching them to read their political and social reality. His work has been a catalyst worldwide in the last 3 decades for programs in adult education, health, and community development. Hope and Timmel, 1984. Minkler and Cox, 1980. Wallterstein and Bernstein, 1994. Wallterstein and Wenger, 1992. As discussed in Chapter 12, Freire's central premise is that the purpose of education should be liberatory, to transform the status quo in the classroom and in people's lives. He questions whether education reinforces powerlessness by treating people as objects who receive knowledge, or whether education enables people to engage in active dialogue and to challenge the conditions that keep them powerless. Freire proposes a dialogic, problem-posing process with equality and mutual respect between learner-teachers and teacher-learners. Problem posing contains a cycle of listening, dialogue, action that enables all participants to engage in continual reflection and action. Through structured dialogue, group participants listen for the issues contained in their own experience, discuss common problems, look for root causes and the interconnections between the problems behind the problem as symptom, and devise strategies to help them transform their reality. Freire, 1970-1973. Conscientization is the consciousness that comes through the social analysis of conditions and people's role in changing these conditions. This awareness enables community groups to analyze moments and open spaces to enact change or to understand those limit situations that may prohibit change. Barnt, 1989. Conscientization is a key ingredient in maintaining a broader vision and sustaining our community organizing efforts over time, and is one of the links between individual, psychological, and community empowerment. Community competence. Closely related to the concept of empowerment is the notion of community competence or problem-solving ability as a central goal and outcome of community organization practice. The competent community is defined by Leonard Cottrell, 1976-403, as one in which the various component parts of the community are able to collaborate effectively on identifying the problems and needs of the community, can achieve a working consensus on goals and priorities, can agree on ways and means to implement the agreed upon goals, can collaborate effectively in the required actions. Important recent refinements in our thinking about the community competence have come with lay health worker programs that have incorporated community development and an emphasis on lay health workers themselves instead of assessing only their impact on clients. Ng and Parker, 1994, Ovribo et al., 1994. So is that peer support? I'm not sure if the lay health workers, if they're describing peer support or not. A major challenge has been to find measurement variables that encompass community competence and capacity changes and are not simply aggregates of measures of individuals or service providers. See chapters 18 and 19. Leadership development also represents a key aspect of development of competent communities. In particular, the development of leaders able to fulfill the roles of animator, stimulating people to think critically and to identify problems and new solutions, and facilitator, providing a process through which the group can discuss its own content in the most productive possible way, is a key to building group competence and effectiveness. Hope and Timmel, 1984. See Appendices 7 and 8. Although Cottrell, 1983, and others, Eng and Partner, 1994, Fallon, 1995, have tended to apply the concept of community competence primarily to geographic communities, its relevance to neo-geographic communities is apparent. Indeed, whether the community is a neighborhood in the South Bronx, a union local in Ohio, or people with HIV/AIDS working together for change, increasing the community's capacity for collective problem identification and problem solving is of paramount importance if the community is to effectively reach both its current and future goals. Many principles and concepts to basic health education have relevance for achieving an increase in community competence. In addition to the concept of empowerment, Barbara Israel, 1985, notes that key approaches within the social network theory and social support may be usefully applied in the development of competent communities. Social network techniques by which one can map the web of social ties in which individuals are embedded may be employed to help identify natural helpers or leaders within a community, to help these natural leaders in turn identify their own networks, to identify high-risk groups within the community, and to involve network members in undertaking their own community assessment and actions necessary to strengthen networks within the community. A number of network assessment tools are available for mapping personal and/or community networks. McAllister and Fisher, 1978, Heitzman and Kaplan, 1988, and other community assets, McKnight and Kretzmann, 1992. And may be usefully employed by health education professionals. The principles of participation and relevance. Two principles central to community organization practice are participation and relevance, or starting where the people are. Neiswander, 1956. Even though these precepts have been rediscovered in recent decades, both have early conceptual roots in social learning theory and in the field of adult education. Fundamental to learning theory, for example, is the realization that individuals must experience a felt need to change or learn before change can take place. German social psychologist Kurt Lewin, 1958, postulated in the mid-1940s that individuals must experience an unfreezing of old attitudes and beliefs before they can consider and try out new ones. In the field of social action organizing, unfreezing is reflected in Alinsky's 1972 articulation of the need to disorganize communities, stirring frustration, creating dissatisfaction with the status quo before they can be organized, or more accurately, reorganized. Change is thus not a one-step occurrence, but a complex process in which old attitudes and practices must be open to re-examination, unfrozen, before change can take place. Lewin, 1958. Health education leader Dorothy Neiswander, 1956, built on this perspective when she articulated the principle of relevance, or starting where the people are, as perhaps the most fundamental tenet of health education practice. The health education professional who begins with the individual or community's felt needs and concerns, rather than with a personal or agency-dictated agenda, will be far more likely to experience community ownership and success in the change process than if he or she were to impose an agenda from the outside. Brockton Soros, 1990. As important as this tenet is in theory, however, Its implementation in practice settings is fraught with difficulties. See chapters 6 and 8. As John McKinley is fond of saying, professionals frequently suffer from an unfortunate malady known as terminal hardening of the categories. They often seek information in ways that identify those community health issues that they, the experts, have already determined to be the most important. Chapter 8. Even if organizers genuinely attempt to start where the people are, they may lack access to the hidden discourse in a community and may therefore misinterpret an apparent community apathy because of their own lack of cultural competence, access to key stakeholders, or cultural translations, or self-reflection on the problematic nature of power dynamics between themselves and community members. Scott, 1990. Organizers who do have access to community discourse may nevertheless find that the community's identification of goals and selection of organizing strategies challenge their own level of comfort or reflect values such as racism, sexism, or homophobia. See chapters 6 and 8. In the latter instance, the health educator's commitment to starting where the people are and to community self-determination must be tempered with the paramount principle of social justice in the larger community, whose interests should not be served by the parochial and prejudicial concerns and actions of one subgroup. Minkler, 1994. Closely related to the principle of relevance, the principle of participation has its roots in social psychology theories of learning and adult education. Dewey, 1946. Indeed, the very notion of adult education, Indeed, the very notion of adult education as a process of creating situations in which learners, or in Frere's 1973 terminology, learner teachers, can develop their own understandings and make and act on their own decisions, is highly congruent with the community organization principle of facilitating high-level participation by community members at all stages in the organizing process. For Neil Bracht and August Soros, 1990-201, citizen participation refers to the social process of taking part voluntarily in either formal or informal activities, programs, or discussions to bring about planned change or improvement in community life, services, and/or resources. For the World Health Organization and UNICEF, as defined in the Alma Ata Declaration, 1978, community participation is the process by which individuals and families assume responsibility for their own health and welfare and for those of the community, and develop the capacity to contribute to their and the community's development. As noted earlier, the principle of participation has indeed been a hallmark of the recent WHO vision of health promotion, which stresses high-level participation as one of its principal components, and of empowerment education for health, see Chapter 1, and the Healthy Cities movement. In Canada, the new model of health promotion adopted in the mid-1980s was centered around a broadly defined concept of citizen participation, along with the concepts of self-help and mutual aid. EP, 1986. In the United States, the development of the CDC's PATCH program was heavily influenced by the community organization literature on participation and local ownership. Kruder, 1992. Indeed, active participation by a wide range of community members is described by Patch 1992 architects as the first of 5 elements critical to the success of Patch projects. Multi-site community-based efforts such as the 8-year $45 million COMMIT project have stressed community participation through the development of community boards and task forces. Thompson et al., 1990 to 1991. Embedded in each of these is a conviction that effective participation means sharing power and responsibility. Yet, as both the Patch and Commit projects have demonstrated, competing goals, e.g., meeting the scientific goals of a research study or assigning highest priority to health department, rather than community definitions of need, may severely restrict the degree to which high-level community participation can be achieved. Such problems are largely overcome when we move from efforts at incorporating principles of participation in health education program development to purer forms of community organizing and a community building practice. In the latter regard, as Walter explains in Chapter 5, participation is almost synonymous with community building itself. With community at the center, a broad and inclusive continuum of community participation and stakeholders is encompassed in a way that extends to each the power and recognition of its contribution to building and shaping community. Issue selection. One of the most important steps in community organization practice involves the effective differentiation between the problems or things that are troubling and issues or problems the community feels strongly about. As Michael Miller, 1986, and Lee Staples, Chapter 11 suggest, a good issue must meet several important criteria. First, it must be winnable to ensure that work on the campaign does not simply reinforce fatalistic attitudes and beliefs. Second, it must unite members of the group and must involve them in a meaningful way in achieving problem resolution. Third, it should affect lots of people and build up the community or organization, giving leadership experience, increased visibility, etc. Fourth, it should be part of a larger plan or strategy. See Chapter 11 for a detailed discussion of these criteria. A variety of methods familiar to health educators and other social change professionals can be used to help a community group acquire the data needed for issue selection. Among those most popular currently is the focus group, through which a moderator using a predetermined discussion guide or series of questions elicits input from a small group of community members to determine their qualitative perceptions of key issues or concerns facing the community. Stewart and Shamdasani, 1990. Focus groups, door-to-door surveys, and other data collection instruments can be useful in assessing felt needs while increasing a sense of participation. Too often, however, community members are merely invited to express their relative agreement with the outside professional's preconceived notion of what the problems of significance in the community really are. As discussed in Chapter 11, surveys, focus groups, and other methods are useful for issue selection only to the extent that they enable the discovery of the real issues of the concern to the community. As noted earlier, the facilitation of authentic community selection of issues involves taking significant risks. For the group or its leaders may choose issues that are too broad to be winnable or that reflect underlying discriminatory values and attitudes that the organizer cannot ethically endorse. See Chapters 6 and 8. An approach to issue selection that has proved especially helpful in confronting and overcoming some of these difficulties involves the use of Freire's 1970-1973 dialogic problem-solving or problem-posing method. As noted previously, part of a Freirean approach involves engaging participants in identifying their core generative themes, those themes that elicit social and emotional involvement and therefore high-level motivation to participate. Community development approaches worldwide have adopted Freire's educational strategies to identify the core issues for starting organization efforts. Arnold et al., 1991, Hope and Timmel, 1984. Community organizers in the United States have adopted strategies from an organizational development in creating strategic action plans to prioritizing issues by available resources, appropriate timelines, and barriers to reaching goals. French and Bell, 1990. In choosing an issue that may be feasible to win, politically minded organizers have included an analysis of power brokers, allies, and resistors. Feldblum et al., 1994. See also Chapter 11. Thoughtfully undertaken issue selection processes can contribute to community empowerment and serve as a positive force for social change. However, calls have been increasingly made for a new process of community organizing, one relying less on issue-based mobilization and more on community education, leadership development, and support, and building local sustainable organizations. Trainer, 1993-7. Community building practice is being looked to as this new process, one that is less concerned with community issue selection, as with the identification, nurturing, and celebration of community strengths, and the creation of a context by people in the community for the sharing of those strengths. McKnight, 1987, see also Chapter 5. Measurement and evaluation issues. A major limitation of most community organizing efforts to date has been their failure to adequately address evaluation processes and outcomes. See Chapter 18. This failure typically stems from several sources, among them severe funding constraints and lack of knowledge concerning how to build a meaningful evaluation component into the organizing effort. As John Connell and others, 1995, have pointed out, the continually evolving nature of community organizing and community-based initiatives, complex contextual issues, and the fact that these projects often seek change on multiple levels make many traditional evaluative approaches inappropriate or ill-suited to such organizing endeavors. Similarly, the focus of many standard evaluation approaches on long-term change in health and social indicators may miss the shorter-term system-level impacts with which community organizing is heavily concerned. Among the latter are improvements in organizational collaboration, increased levels of community involvement and action, and the promotion of healthier public policies or environmental conditions. Maldred, Polisek, and Wallterstein in Press. The lack of formal evaluations of most community organizing efforts, coupled with the failure of many engaged in these projects to write up and publish their results, has made it difficult for scholars or practitioners to amass a literature of successful and unsuccessful organizing efforts, and the hallmark of each. Although some characteristics of successful community collaborations have been identified, e.g., shared vision, strong leadership, and an accent on process, and not merely task achievement, Connell et al., 1995, much remains to be examined and assessed. The careful evaluation and documentation of both successful and unsuccessful community organizing projects must be a vital part of this new database. Remember, in research, we're not reporting our wins. We are reporting what happened. Fortunately, the late 1980s and the first half of the 1990s saw important steps forward in empowerment education and related areas with direct applicability to community organizing. Key among these were the convening of a roundtable on community initiatives for children and families and its development of new approaches to evaluating community initiatives, Connell et al., 1995. This edited volume explores dilemmas commonly faced in the design, measurement, and interpretation of community initiatives, as well as a variety of options and strategies for evaluations working with such projects. A special issue of Health Education Research, Goodman, Birding et al., 1993, on community coalitions includes several articles that address measurement and evaluation issues. A two-part issue of Health Education Quarterly, Wallterstein and Bernstein, 1994, further adds to the literature in this area, including both concepts and case studies that deal in part with issues of evaluation and measurement. Within the latter collection, Eng and Parker's 1994 development and testing of a scale for measuring community competence represent a particularly important contribution. offering readers an effective new tool for measuring a key dimension of community organizing efforts. Similarly, Israel et al.'s 1994 development, validation, and application of a scale for measuring perceptions of individual organization and community control, presented in Appendix 9, provides a critical missing piece in the evaluation literature to date, and one well suited to evaluating community organization outcomes. Still, another useful evaluation resource can be found in the self-reflection workbook developed in New Mexico to evaluate community organizing and community building in the context of creating healthier communities. Maldrud et al. In Press. The workbook focuses on changes in community processes, such as grassroots participation, and changes in short system level outcomes, such as the development of new programs, as a result of the organizing experience. It is these middle level outcomes, rather than long-term changes in self-rated health and other health or social indicators, that are often the most important in documenting community competence and empowerment. A final recent contribution to the literature in this area is the publication of Empowerment Evaluation, Fetterman, Kaftarian, and Wandersman, 1996. Empowerment evaluation is defined as an interactive and iterative process by which the community, in collaboration with the support team, identifies its own health issues, decides how to address them, monitors progress towards its goals, and uses the information to adapt and sustain the initiative. Fawcett et al., 1996, 169. Although some of the evaluation approaches described in this book fit more a social planning than a true organizing approach to practice, most have immediate relevance for health education and other social change professionals concerned with the evaluation of a community organizing efforts. See chapters 18 and 19 for a fuller discussion of empowerment evaluation and its applications. And immediately, I have thoughts on how to use this in 2 different programs that I've consulted with someone running in the last 48 hours. I have 2. I really want this book. I want the textbook from the New Mexico project too. So bookmark pages 46 and 47. Gems, absolute gems. Okay. The availability of new theoretical contributions and practical tools that lend themselves to evaluation of community organizing fails, of course, to solve the problem of insufficient funding and/or commitment to carrying out high-quality evaluative research. Yet, the increased attention of both foundation and government funders to evaluation and measurement issues in community organizing and community-based initiatives is encouraging. If translated into increased funding, thus increased attention, together with the availability of new measurement tools and processes, could help spur major advances in the evaluation and documentation of community organizing in the years ahead. Because it's not mysterious. It really is not. Okay. It's research. That means we don't know about it yet. We're still learning. Conclusion. The continued pivotal role of community organization in health education and related disciplines reflects not only its time-tested efficacy, but also its high degree of philosophical fit with the most fundamental principles of effective community health organization and other social change approaches. Community organization thus stresses the principle of relevance, the principle of participation, and the importance of creating environments in which individuals and communities can become empowered as they increase their community competence or problem-solving ability. Similarly, newer conceptualizations of community building stress many of these same principles within an overall approach that focuses on community growth of community growth and change from the inside through increased group identification, the discovery, nurturing, and mapping of community assets, and the creation of critical consciousness. all toward the end of building stronger and more caring communities. Using community organizing and community building skills and approaches, health educators and other social change professionals can help communities identify and build on their strengths, select the issues they feel are of greatest relevance, and work together in mobilizing their resources and in other ways addressing the goals they have collectively set. Of at least equal importance, however, professionals can challenge themselves to examine their own dynamic of power with their professional colleagues and members of the community to understand the complexities of working in partnership towards the goals of community ownership of the projects undertaken and increased empowerment and community competence. In sum, both community organization and newer conceptualizations of community building practice have essential messages for health educators and other social change professionals at a wide variety of settings and may hold particularly relevance in the changing socio-political climate at the dawn of the 21st century. So we have one more article this week in week 3, and I hope you'll be joining me in some community building and self-empowerment activities around this.